Florida State, Big Ten. These are two names that I wouldn't have necessarily connected together, right? Even as recent as a couple of years ago. Heck, even as recent as a couple of months ago. I'm not sure if the Noles and the Big Ten would be like-minded, but as we sit in the right here and the right now, they may be joining forces together, maybe as soon as 2025. The Florida State Board of Trustees dropped they dropped multiple bombs on Friday, the ultimate Friday news dump, right, by this Board of Trustees that included none other than Drew Weatherford. Remember him, the former quarterback of the Florida State Seminoles? That was a welcome surprise on the meeting that I was able to watch on YouTube on Friday morning. But I'm not going to cover the 38-page document. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not big into sports business. You know what this channel is. It's a football channel first. Yes, I talk about realignment. Yes, I talk about the things involved in the Big Ten. But I'm going to be real. I'm not going to read a 38-page document. I got Christmas presents to wrap. I got Christmas cookies to bake. I got things to do. So thank you to the people that did read the article and put the major snippets on Twitter. What I'm going to talk about today is the impact of Florida State, not only of this decision, but Florida State possibly joining the Big Ten Conference down the road, because not only does it have a crater-like impact, it has a big ripple effect as well. That's what happens when a Florida State-sized asteroid drops down on the college football world. I want to cover a few bullet points really before I get to the impact. The ACC Grant of Rights. What's more difficult to get into? To read the ACC Grant of Rights in Charlotte, North Carolina, or to read any document in the Vatican archives? That is a question that I think a lot of people maybe are asking right now. Ironclad is a word that people had used to describe the ACC Grant of Rights. Maybe ironclad was the room that the ACC Grant of Rights was locked in. And maybe there's a reason why the Grant of Rights was locked so much, is because there is holes in that puppy. There is holes. And I think Florida State has a good chance. They're not going to get out of this thing scot-free at $0, but I also don't think they're going to be paying around $500 million. I think there's going to be a settlement somewhere in between. And how about the potential out clause in 2027 that ESPN has as well? That was a huge piece of information that could certainly affect things kind of coming on down the pike as well. So let's talk about the impact. When you talk about all of the brands that are left over in conference realignment, right now that the Pac has kind of gone the way that it has, Florida State, in terms of the ACC, the Seminoles are the brand out there. They are the number one option for the Big Ten Conference. They are a big-time draw across college football. And we know that the Big Ten Conference has wanted to get into the South. We know that they wanted to get into the SEC territory for more reasons than one. If the Big Ten is able to connect with the Florida State Seminoles, that is a big-time home run. Like, look what already the Big Ten has, adding Oregon, adding USC, adding Washington, right? Adding those big-time West Coast brands. And now you go into the Southeast, a team that just went 13-0, and Mike Norvell has them climbing back towards the top of the mountain in college football. That's going to attract some big-time eyeballs. Florida State versus Penn State. Can you imagine a whiteout on NBC between the Seminoles and the Nittany Lions? Maybe that's finally the rivalry that Penn State could kind of get together with as well. So the first big impact is Florida State being the brand left in the ACC and the brand possibly going to the Big Ten. That would be the first big impact. The second big impact is the collision with the SEC. Of course, Florida. That is the heart, right? In Tallahassee, near the Panhandle there. That is the heart of SEC country. We know how important the state of Florida is to recruiting. having a presence, a Big Ten presence down in the state of Florida would be a direct shot towards the Southeastern Conference. Having now a footprint in SEC territory, a pipeline of sorts for recruiting, to get more into that Florida area, and having a school that's going to want to own that state in recruiting as well is ultra important. Because I think the reason why it's perceived, at least, that the SEC has this advantage is because all the good players are down in the South. Louisiana's got good players. Texas has got good players. Florida's got good players. I'm not going to disagree with that. The South is a tremendous recruiting ground. So for the Big Ten to be able to get in to that recruiting ground in the state of Florida would be gigantic. Maybe it wouldn't happen right away. Maybe it wouldn't happen 2 years from now, or 2 years from when Florida State enters the Big Ten. But 4 years down the line, 5 years down the line, where you're able to kind of get a couple of classes under your belt, and kids in Florida are kind of able to see the impact that Florida State has, going to Penn State, going to Michigan, going to Wisconsin, going to USC, going to Oregon, going to some of those places, it might happen down the line where you start to see the shift a little bit. Now, the ripple effect, that's where I really want to get into this thing as well. Because getting into the state of Florida, getting Florida State to get into the Big Ten, that's big. No question about it. But you got to think that the Noles are going to have a travel partner. And the more I really think about this, the more I believe in this round of realignment. I'm not saying fight on right now. I'm saying two potential teams, one being Florida State and one being the other. That's where I want to start to get into the ripple effect. Because once Florida State makes the move, whether it's to the SEC or whether it's to the Big Ten, you're going to see more stones and dominoes start to fall over on the Atlantic coast. So I've got really I've got 4 teams in 3 slots in terms of the priority, in terms of the ripple effect for Florida State and the Big Ten. I believe number 1 is going to be hard to pull off, and that's the University of North Carolina. Because we know how much the SEC is in on North Carolina. We know that's their number 1 priority as well. If all of this goes down, the Big Ten will likely get their number 1 in Florida State, and the SEC might get their number 1 in North Carolina. North Carolina has a lot of things that make sense for the Big Ten Conference, right? That is a good academic school, which we know the Big Ten really strives to go after those kinds of schools. Although AU is not a requirement, it's kind of something that's nice, maybe a little bit of a cherry on top of the sundae, so to speak. But I think North Carolina has turned down the Big Ten before. Let's not forget that as well. But I believe it's going to be tough to get priority number 1 kind of away from the Southeastern Conference. Let's go down to number 2. This is a 2A and a 2B. Because I could see it possibly going either way. It's Clemson and Miami. If I'm a betting man and we say Florida State is the number 1, the heavy favorite, the odds-on favorite to go to the Big Ten, if we're betting for number 2, I'd say it's one of these two. I'd say it's either the Tigers or it's the Hurricanes. Let me kind of break down each one right now. Clemson, very interesting situation. Remember when Clemson was Clemsoning? When they maybe weren't the super national brand that they are, at least they were 2017, 2018. I was about to say that they are now. But in the past year or two, Dabo and the Clemson Tigers have fallen off a little bit. I think the big question for the Clemson Tigers, are they still that national brand that will turn people's heads, that will cause people to really tune in droves? That's the big question. I think if Big Ten administration and if the Big Ten really views them as such, I think Clemson has an advantage over the University of Miami right now. Like academically, right? I know that's something people are going to talk about a lot. But academically, Clemson is still ahead of some schools in the Big Ten, according to some rankings, right? So they're not way down in terms of being the bottom of the barrel in terms of academic rankings in the Big Ten. So they still kind of are up to there. And when you look at a Clemson game, it's all orange. It's filled up to the brim. They have a fan base that shows up each and every single time. Imagine Clemson hosting Michigan, running down, touching Howard's Rock and everything. You can kind of start to imagine how that could possibly pull some people in. Even a team like Wisconsin maybe going into Clemson could be very intriguing as well. Let's go on to the University of Miami. Now, we did say AAU is not a requirement, but the Hurricanes just got AAU status. Now, Mario Cristobal, the boosters, and the collectives down there are trying to put a whole bunch of money into the Hurricanes to make them good again. Okay, maybe it didn't happen this year, but they're trying. Right, you look at some of these late signing day pushes. How about Jeremiah Smith, right, where they were trying at the 11th hour to get him to come over from Ohio State. Miami's an interesting one because they're really selling out their stadium, right, that they share with the Miami Dolphins, if they're really, really good, right? So that's kind of the situation that the Hurricanes really find themselves in. I think when you look at fan support from that perspective, maybe Clemson has a little bit of an edge in that department, but I think Miami has the backing. They have a market, right, getting into the city of Miami, South Florida, right? We talk about Florida as a whole, but South Florida, that Miami area, South Beach, that's a really prime area when you look at a recruiting market across the country. So that would be big for the Hurricanes as well. But the more we kind of go down this thing, the more I feel pretty confidently that you could see Florida State and Clemson come to the Big Ten and Miami possibly go to the Big 12. Now, if neither of those two teams work, for any combination of reasons, right? The SEC may be getting involved in switching their priorities. Georgia Tech could be laying out there as well. That's where I think. I think they're kind of the third team. They're in the third slot of a 4-team situation right now. Look, they're in Atlanta. Atlanta's a dog town. They're a Georgia Bulldogs town. I don't think anybody's really doubting that. So you say you get the Atlanta market, which you do to some degree, right? But how many people in Atlanta are really gung-ho about the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets maybe having Big Ten teams come into Atlanta for these Georgia Tech games? Now all of a sudden you have Michigan coming to town. All of a sudden you have USC coming to town. Maybe that changes the interest a little bit there at Georgia Tech, but I think they're at the bottom of this. I really think that's where they are here right now. But that's kind of the ripple effect that I believe you could see with Florida State possibly going to the Big Ten. This is big time stuff, folks. I think the ACC, like the Big 12, is still going to find a way to exist. But I also think the Big 12 is going to eat at the ACC's table as well. I think the SEC is going to find a way to eat. If I'm a betting man right now, we know politics in the states of North Carolina and Virginia is going to be at play. Virginia and Virginia Tech are tied. It looks like North Carolina and North Carolina State are tied. If I'm a betting man, those 4 teams go to the SEC. Florida State and Clemson come over to the Big Ten. Miami, Louisville, and Pitt maybe go to the Big 12, and then the ACC builds from there. And then I didn't even talk about Notre Dame. That's a whole other can of worms. But let me say this. I think, remember how Notre Dame was adamant, we need to find a home for the Stanford Cardinal in bringing them into the ACC, which was a kind of one of the big reasons why Florida State was as upset as they are with the ACC. I think Notre Dame possibly bringing Stanford, right? You talk about maybe this round. It isn't as focused on academics with Florida State and Clemson. Yeah, you'll make that up with Notre Dame and with Stanford. For some reason, my gut's telling me that those two might be connected together. Either way, the future's extremely bright for the Big Ten.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.